The void beyond the dropship's porthole stretched infinite, a velvet black canvas littered with distant sparks of dying stars. Within that darkness, I could almost believe the universe as I knew it, of honor-bound warriors and orderly conquest, remained untouched. Yet as Sergeant Al-Rook of the Daguerreothian 3rd Legion, I had learned long ago that any illusion of safety dissolves the moment one crosses another species' threshold. I had been bred for war in the harsh highlands of Daguerreoth, a planet where only the strongest chitin endured sub-zero storms and constant tectonic upheavals. From my earliest memories, the rhythmic pounding of battle drums was a lullaby, and the taste of ionic gas, soothing to my compound eyes, was the first sign of legitimate nourishment. Each hatchling was indoctrinated with a singular truth: Daguerreothian superiority, destined to spread across stars. Yet despite decades spent subjugating rival clans and silencing rebel outposts on distant worlds, nothing prepared me for the sight of Earth's blue-green jewel drifting beneath our dropship, an ember of fragile life suspended in a weightless sea of darkness. Arrival at Ares Station. Estimated time to drop, 12 minutes. Lieutenant Karu's resonant voice crackled over the comm. Sergeant Al-Rook, ensure your unit's equipment is at peak efficiency. No surprises. I checked my disruptor rifle, its coils humming a crisp violet. My multi-lensed optics swept the other pods. Each of my 7 subordinates, hardened veterans with countless scars, sat in meditative silence. Their scaled exoskeletons bore the faint sheen of ceremonial war paint, each representing a theater of past victories. I touched my dorsal crest reflexively, knuckles tightening as I recalled the final briefing hologram. Humans are unpredictable. Their biology diverges from any known xenoscopic patterns. Do not underestimate their will to fight. At 200 hours local time, the dropship's containment field fractured. Gravity anchors activated, dragging us hurtling toward the receding starfield. Inside the pod, each breath of recycled air tasted of anticipation and dread. One by one, the emergency doors retracted on silent servos. We spilled into the hangar of Ares Station. The metal walls gleamed under harsh artificial lighting, a hybrid of Terran and Daguerreothian alloys repurposed over decades. Half a kilometer above Mars's desolate plains, the station orbited functionally yet felt brutally utilitarian. Catwalks crisscrossed above, support columns writhed with pulsating conduits, and walls were scarred by years of micrometeorite impacts. Lieutenant Karu hovered behind a shattered hydroponics bay, once used to grow algae for carbon processing, now a labyrinth of broken glass and twisted steel. He whispered, "Primary objective, seize and destroy the central communications array. Secondary, eliminate any survivors who might pose a threat to incoming legions." From the shadows emerged movement. 2 humans, hunched behind a fallen maintenance drone. Their faces were obscured by respirators, but their eyes glowed with a feral determination I had never witnessed on Daguerreoth. One gestured at the other, motioning to a control panel near the station's core. We exchanged a glance and advanced in synchronized fluidity. The first clash, my disruptor's coil snapped to life, sending out a violet pulse that arced toward the nearest human. His body convulsed, limbs twisting as synaptic overload surged through his nervous system. He collapsed in a heap, his plasma rifle sputtering and sliding away on the metal floor. "Target down," I reported in the clipped protocol speech, my voice modulator sanitizing any personal inflection. Still, my claws trembled at the scent of burnt synaptic tissue. Despite the briefing, I could not dismiss the jolt of what the Hollows called empathy. A foreign sensation for a Daguerreothian soldier, but I felt it ripping at me, along with a mocking sense of admiration for their tenacity. Lieutenant Karu's silhouette darted forward, recloaking his armor briefly with an optical shroud. He rasped, "Disable their comm before they alert the rest of the colony." We strafed down the corridor, the hum of our disruptors mingling with alarm sirens that began to swell like a dying chorus. Red light bathed every surface as the station's power shifted into emergency reserves. Flickering consoles sputtered warnings in a dozen human dialects. Sparks cascaded from overhead conduits, scattering across blasted floors. At the heart of the station lay the communications core, a domed chamber bristling with antennae, data rod arrays, and fusion generators. Two more humans stood guard, one aiming a rifle that glowed cerulean between every shot, the other hammering commands into a console. "High five," a human shouted, though he was alone. Ridiculous bravado. I leveled my disruptor and squeezed the trigger. The coil flared, and the human's rifle fizzled into molten slag. He jerked backward, his respirator cracked. He howled, clutching his throat. The second human spun, firing blindly. Bolt slammed into the wall 4 meters to my left, carving gashes of blue plasma. My second coil unleashed a pulse that sheared through his weapon and seared his right hand off at the forearm. He collapsed, clutching his severed limb, blood mingling with the station's sterile atmosphere. Lieutenant Carew strode forward and hurled a charge at the console. It detonated with white-hot fury. The generator convulsed, showering sparks across the chamber. Data rod towers imploded inward, their tendrils of information evaporating. A silence fell that felt heavier than any explosion. The heart of Ares Station was dead. Shadows of remorse. My subordinates moved to secure the exits, but I lingered at the doorway, watching as the 2 surviving humans lay crumpled, charred and torn. Their labored breaths rasped against failing respirators. The dying man's eyes flickered up at me. In his final moments, the defiance in his gaze was unmistakable. He would not yield until he could no longer draw breath. I bowed my head, a mark of respect not mandated by protocol. The station's red lights faded as backup systems flared on, and the garbled voices in the intercom threatened to mobilize any survivors. When I finally tore my optics away, a sliver of dread had settled in my chest, an emotion I refused to name. The aftermath was chaos. Corridors filled with the acrid smell of burnt insulation and grapnel gas. Sparks drifted like fireflies. Somewhere in the depths I could hear bodies collapsing into the depths of maintenance shafts, their cries swallowed by machinery. When the last console went dark, Lieutenant Carew signaled our extraction. We retraced our steps, each footstep amplifying the hollow ache in my chest. 4. Return to the flagship. 2 days later, I stood on the observation deck of the Daguerreothian command cruiser Jaru's Decree, gazing down at the fractured remains of Ares Station. A field of debris drifted in silent orbit, each shard a testament to what we had accomplished and to what we had destroyed. Below, fishermen from Phobos, I had learned their names. Sarah Tyrrell, Aldrich Voss, hovered in relic shuttles picking through the wreckage for salvage. Their faces, illuminated by cargo lights, were etched with a determination born of desperation. "Congratulations, Sergeant," Lieutenant Carew intoned behind me. "Your report was exemplary." He tapped a datapad and orders scrolled across it. "The 3rd Legion will maintain orbital perimeter patrols. Next objective, secure Martian ground installations." I nodded, though the customary pride failed to ignite. My optics lingered on a tiny pressurized rover that clung to a fragment of metal. I imagined its pilots, humans scavenging for food, recycled air, or a pathway back to dying Earth. On Daguerreoth, we had no need to salvage hope from wreckage. We built our futures on the bones of our enemies. That night, in the communal mess hall, the translation speakers broadcast triumphant anthems. My fellow legionnaires roared with laughter, sharing tales of skirmishes on Ilium and Chandrakar. Their stories rang hollow to me. They spoke of human victims as bugs, useless, vermin that scurried in overcrowded hives. But I had seen their faces, eyes wide with rage, grief, or resolute acceptance. None had flinched when I pressed my disruptor's barrel against their temple. A visage surfaced unbidden, a human woman I had encountered near the station's airlock. She'd been dragging her younger brother, half-conscious and bleeding. I had cornered her in a narrow corridor, but instead of raising her rifle, she'd placed her free hand on the wall and shouted, through cracked lips, "You will not take my brother." With a single pulse, her rifle jerked from her grip. She crumpled to the floor, blood blooming across her chest. Yet as she lay dying, she pushed herself up on trembling arms, raised her rifle's empty barrel, and fired, aiming for Karoo's leg. The shot missed by inches. Before she could raise her rifle again, the disruptor tore through her visor, and then the lights faded from her eyes. In the mess hall, I closed my mandibles around, gods forbid, food, but my hunger betrayed me. Each bite tasted like ash. The laughter of my peers grated against my nerves. I excused myself, leaving behind clattered trays and mocking cheers. 5. The weight of honors. Tomorrow I was scheduled to receive the Legion's highest honor, the Shard of Arak, an emerald-long prism forged from my home planet's core. As standard, the ceremony would be recorded for broadcast across the fleet. My exploits at Ares Station had become legend, though no recording would capture the flicker of doubt in my optics, nor the echo of a human mother's scream. I retreated to the quarters reserved for decorated officers, a sparsely furnished chamber with a single viewport. Through it, I watched the endless curvature of Mars recede into the distance. The hulking shadow of the Jaru's decree was all that anchored my perspective to reality. I reached into a sealed locker and produced a locket carved from Daguerreothian basalt. Inside was a fragment of my father's crest, an heirloom passed down through generations. I traced its grooves with a claw, recalling his voice when he declared, "My first kill at age 72 standard years. Let this mark your commitment to Daguerreothian destiny," he had whispered, his mandibles quivering with pride. But tonight that legacy felt like a chain around my thorax. I set the locket on the desk and leaned forward, pressing my head into my hands. Outside, the comet Keller's tail streaked by, a reminder of the vastness beyond conflict, and of the fleeting nature of every life, whether human or Daguerreothian. A soft hiss interrupted my reverie. A drone slid beneath my door, projecting a hologram of the High Council's envoy, Elder Shalurn, his crown spines glinting under the overhead. "Filament. Sergeant Alruk," his voice was cold, ceremonial. "Tomorrow you will stand before the Legion's leaders and accept the Shard of Arak. Reflect on your duty." I inclined my head in assent. The projection dissolved, leaving the room in darkness. The red emergency lights glowed low, revealing dust motes drifting in microgravity. I rose and walked to the viewport. My reflection merged with the distant stars. For the first time, I wondered what darkness might lie within me, and whether a being built for war could ever forgive itself for seeing an enemy's face as more than a target. Below, Ares Station's remains drifted like cosmic debris. A scar across the void. I swallowed, steeling myself for tomorrow's ceremony. Yet in that moment I vowed silently that I would carry the echoes of battle not as trophies, but as warnings. That every victory carved a wound in one's soul, and that empathy, even in the heart of a Daguerreothian sergeant, might yet become the spark that changes the fate of worlds. By the time we reached Martian orbit again, the weight of Ares Station's shattered remains still pressed upon my mind like a grinding vice. I had reported, filed the data logs, and collected my accolades. But none of that could exorcise the images of dying humans I had seen. Lieutenant Karoo insisted it was merely the stress of battle, an inevitable burden of command. Yet as I watched the red dust of Mars give way to emptiness, I felt the stirrings of something far more unsettling. Doubt. 2 months after Ares Station fell, I received new orders to establish a forward observation post on the Martian surface. Not far from a recently captured human settlement called Fort Helios, my unit was tasked with securing supply lines, gathering intelligence on human militia movements, and preparing for the next wave of the Legion's advance. At first glance, it seemed a routine logistical assignment, but beneath that veneer lay a far harsher reality. Fort Helios was more than a strategic foothold. It was a crucible of human desperation. We landed at dusk, the dusty red horizon tinged with the faint blue glow of Earthlight. The outpost lay in ruins, collapsed walls, charred vehicles, overturned cargo pods. A fine layer of gray dust carpeted every surface as though the entire settlement had been buried in ash overnight. My subordinates, veteran soldiers all, moved quickly to establish defensive perimeters, erect sensor arrays, and erect the skeletal framework of our observation towers. I oversaw their work from a distance, watching shadows lengthen across the scorched plains. Private Shalurn, a new recruit barely 2 standard seasons into his training, approached me as we secured the perimeter's eastern flank. His exoskeleton plate still bore the glossy shine of fresh reinforcement, and his eyes danced with what I recognized as the bravado of youth. "Sergeant Al-Rook," he began, lifting his disruptor rifle and tapping its coils. "What can you tell me about the humans we'll be watching? Are they truly as savage as the reports claimed?" I paused, studying his face. In another life, I might have answered confidently, "Yes, they are savage, but effective." Instead, I found my mandibles tightening. "They are resourceful and determined," I said carefully. "They fight not for glory but for survival. They cling to every scrap of technology, every scrap of hope. Do not underestimate their will." He nodded slowly, as though digesting that unfamiliar idea. I left him standing among the wreckage, the Martian wind stirring ash at his feet. First blood at Fort Helioson. The third Martian night, as the 2 moons of Phobos and Deimos aligned overhead, our camp's defensive shields flickered under. Sudden solar interference. By the time the backup generators hummed back to life, human guerrillas had breached our eastern perimeter. Shadows slithered through the twisted husks of armored transports, slipping between sensor sweeps. I led a patrol of 4 through the dim-lit corridors of a half-buried supply depot, disruptors at the ready. Near the munitions cache, we encountered them, 3 humans wearing improvised armor fashioned from melted rover plating, their respirators hissing in the thin air. They moved too quickly for any formal volley, striking from behind cover, then vanishing into the labyrinth of collapsed corridors. A plasma bolt caught Private Shalurn in the side, his cry echoing like a wound in my chest. He collapsed, his exoskeleton cracked and smoking. "Shalurn down!" I barked as another shot slammed into the wall inches from my mandibles. I returned fire, the disruptor's beam slicing through the dust-choked air. 1 gorilla crumpled, but 2 more melted, back into darkness. I knelt beside Shalurn, lifting his shattered shell to inspect the damage. His optics flickered as crimson fluid pooled beneath his armor plating. I held his clawed hand lightly. "Shalurn, stay with me," I urged, though I knew his odds were slim. In my years of battle, I had seen many Daguerreothian soldiers shatter, their exoskeletons, and recover. But the ferocity of this human ambush had been too precise, too calculated. His eyelids fluttered open, wide with panic. Through a raspy gasp, he managed, "I never thought they'd be so relentless." His voice cut off, and then his optics dimmed. I carried his lifeless body back to camp under the pavilion shield's faltering glow. That night, I heard Shalurn's name called out in hushed tones by my subordinates, each silently grieving the hatchling they had trained and teased. I retreated to my quarters, the walls painted a dull gray red by emergency lighting. For the first time since I earned my rank, I could not sleep. Human shadows and silent sorrows in the weeks that followed. I patrolled the surrounding wastes alone whenever possible, seeking understanding in the ruins of Fort Helios. I discovered small encampments of human survivors, desolate men and women who scavenged Martian scrap for sustenance, for warmth, for something resembling hope. One morning, I chanced upon a decrepit hatchling, barely adolescence, working on a salvaged hover drone under a collapsed gantry. His face was stained with tears and caked ash. His small hands trembled as he rewired a frayed conduit. He did not see me approach, so engrossed was he in his tinkering. I watched, unmoving, as he gently coaxed a salvaged sensor online, then fell, to his knees under the strain of a sudden cave-in. A beam of metal collapsed, pinning him beneath. Before I could act, his older sister appeared, eyes wild, hands cramped around a plasma cutter stolen from an abandoned roving lab. I raised my disruptor, but she did not fire. Instead, she threw her cutter aside, dropped to her knees beside her brother, and tried to push the beam from his chest with bare hands. "Go!" She screamed at me in fractured Daguerreothian. "You did this to us. Leave!" I hesitated, disruptor humming. My instincts urged me to press forward, end her defiance, and remove the threat. But as I knelt to help lift the beam with my armored claw, she flinched, tears streaming. For a moment, our eyes locked, her fury, her grief, her unwavering desperation. In that instant, I saw not an enemy, but a broken family clinging to life on a dying world. Her brother survived, but only after I bore him to my medics, where they stitched fractured bones and soothed burns with humming analgesics. That evening, I returned to my observation post above the ruins. Alone, I grappled with the conflicting truths etched into my memory. Shalurn's death at the hands of human cunning, and the small human boy's life saved by my intervention. On Daguerreoth, we revered strength above all else. But here, across the black gulf of space, I felt something else, an echo of compassion that filled the void between victory and mercy. The emissary's plea one fortnight later, when the red Martian dawn painted the sky, I received a message from a human liaison named Retta Tolkien. He requested a face-to-face meeting at the neutral zone, the skeletal remains of the old Fort Helios command bunker. Though strict protocol forbade parley with enemy civilians, I sensed that this was no ordinary plea. I stood at the edge of the cratered courtyard, disruptor slung across my armored back. Retta approached alone, unarmed, white flag draped over his shoulder like a ragged banner. He was gaunt, his armor battered and barely fitting. In his arms, he carried a small sculpture, interlaced bones and scavenged wire, twisted into the shape of a child's smiling face. "Sergeant Al-Rook," he began, each word measured and solemn. "I do not come as a supplicant. I come as a father." His compound eyes flickered with sorrow. "This is all that remains of my daughter's creation. Before she died in the plague last winter." He tilted the sculpture toward me. The bone fragments glimmered under the weak Martian sun, and I felt a lump in my throat. I knelt, despite the rigid posture expected of my rank, and took the sculpture gently in my claws. Its edges were rough, the wires jagged, yet the smiling form was unmistakable, the innocent grin of childhood crafted out of nothing but grief. He exhaled sharply. "Your reports call humans untrustworthy nuisances, but I've had enough of war. If you value honor as your doctrine demands, give us a chance to end this cycle. Let us negotiate a ceasefire along this sector, just long enough for my people to reclaim their children's graves and bury them with dignity." I looked into his eyes and saw the raw ache of loss, the same ache I glimpsed in Shalurn's young sister, in the hollowed stare of a human veteran I had captured in Ares Station. In that moment, I felt the rigid certainty of my upbringing fracture under the weight of shared sorrow. "Elder Tolkien," I said finally, my tone softer than I intended, "I cannot promise the High Council will agree, but I will carry your plea." He bowed his head once, then turned and disappeared behind the ruined walls. In the stillness that followed, I held the bone sculpture to my chest, feeling its weight like a heartbeat against my own. Breaking the cycle back at the observation post, I drafted a recommendation that defied every tenet taught to me since hatchlinghood. Request: a temporary ceasefire to enable burial rites, medical aid, and civilian evacuation. My report detailed the diminished strategic value of perpetuating hostilities against a population teetering on the brink of extinction. I invoked Shalurn's sacrifice, the human father's plea, and the flicker of empathy I could no longer deny. The response came swiftly. The High Council's envoy demanded that I revoke the suggestion at once. Humans could not be trusted to spare Daguerreothian lives if given quarter. But a single vote of dissent arose from Elder Shalurn, citing the benefits of diplomacy and long-term stability. The vote was tied, a first in living memory, and by protocol the dissenting voice dictated a temporary truce for this sector. 2 days later, I stood once more in the ruined courtyard of Fort Helios, flanked on one side by the Daguerreothian 3rd Legion and on the other by a small assembly of human survivors. Retta Tolkien knelt on one knee, his free hand pressed against the ashen earth. I knelt opposite him, my clawed hand closing over a ceremonial clasp, a braided filament of Daguerreothian metal and human bone, symbolizing fragile unity. By the authority of the Third Legion's High Council and the surviving leaders of Fort Helios, I intoned, my voice echoing through the hollow shell. We hereby declare a ceasefire along this sector for the purpose of honoring the fallen, healing the wounded, and seeking a path to peace. Whispers rippled through both camps. Some of my warriors lowered their disruptors, unease flickering across their exoskeletons. The humans removed hoods and respirators, revealing gaunt faces marked by soot and tears. For a moment, the two sides stood apart, two mirror images of grief and exhaustion, separated by the legacy of war. Reda Tolkien rose slowly, clutching the bone sculpture against his chest. He placed it reverently in the center of the courtyard. "Let this stand as a testament," he said, voice choking on dust and sorrow, "that even in the darkest of times life and honor may yet prevail." As the sun sank beyond the Martian horizon, its last rays cast long shadows over the ruins. I felt a strange relief wash over me, as though the burden of Shalurn's death and the countless human lives I had extinguished could be laid to rest, if only temporarily. The truce would not last forever. Others on Daguerreoth would not forgive what they saw as weakness. And even now, in the cold of space, war continued on other fronts. But in that courtyard, among shattered walls and drifting ash, I discovered a vital truth. Empathy could survive amid the wreckage of war. By acknowledging our shared losses, we had cracked open the possibility of something more than endless conquest. I rose to my full height, armored crest gleaming in the dim light, and surveyed the faces before me, Daguerreothian and human alike. Their eyes I saw not enemies but survivors reaching across the void, and though the path ahead would be fraught with peril, I felt for the first time in centuries a flicker of hope that perhaps the cycle of violence might one day be broken.